This is the 1959 Santiago International Tournament, a memorial tournament, Torneo de Arturo Alessandri Palma, held from April 20th to May 6th, right on the heels of the Mar del Plata tournament, and 8 of the players here at Santiago also played at Mar del Plata. That was a 15-player event, this a 13-player event. Bobby not having his best event here, tied for 4th place with 7 wins, 4 losses, and a draw. But this event held from April 20th to May 6th, 1959 in Santiago, Chile. 13 grandmasters and masters from Europe, North America, and South America competed. Well, the tournament was fairly important for Fischer, who has only recently begun to compete in international events, just did not fare so well in this particular event. And part of the reason, according to this, that Fischer and Pachmann, after the Mar del Plata event, kind of went on a tour through South America on their way to Santiago. And apparently, in this event, several rounds, Pachmann was playing Fischer's prep, and Fischer was playing Pachmann's prep. And it's been a long, long trip, I think, for the 16-year-old Bobby Fischer. Well, you guys remember when you were that age, no discipline at all, I'm sure. And, stay up till all hours. Who knows? I'm making excuses for him. Simply said, he did not play the best chess of his life in this event, but he played some pretty good chess. All right, so let's get right into it with Luis Augusto Sánchez. To give you his full name, Luis Augusto Sánchez Montenegro was an international master, a title that he earned in 1951 for his tournament victory in Caracas, which was a zonal tournament. Sánchez was born July 20th, 1917. He passed away April 20th, 1982. And he was a 6-time Colombian chess champion. He won his national title in 1938, 1947 and 48, 1954, 1958, and 1962. Quite a span of titles. Luis Augusto Sánchez. Bobby begins here with his usual e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and no surprise to see a Ruy Lopez on the board. Paul Morphy's defense with a6, the Columbus variation with bishop a4. Knight f6, kingside castles, bishop e7, a closed Spanish, rook e1, pawn b5, bishop b3. We've all seen these moves so many times that we can play them now. d6, though, is slightly different than sometimes. Sometimes you'll see the castling right away. c3, of course, now castles. Now h3 to keep the pieces from g4. That's Palcares's variation. Palcares, the Estonian grandmaster who was the greatest world champion never. At least among them. Knight d7 here. It's getting a little unusual. Pawn d4, knight b6. Now Bobby decides to leave the book and plays pawn takes pawn. The Ficklebot not happy with that. The book move is queen's knight to d2, which is answered by bishop f6. And then, of course, knight f1 here. And you go either to e3 or g3, depending on the situation. The most popular reply is rook e8 here, and that gets a thumbs up. Let's go back. In this game, Bobby playing an unusual pawn takes e5, and knight takes e5, knight takes knight, pawn takes the knight, and now queen h5, putting some pressure here on the e-man. We've got the eval bar up over here, so you can see it to the left of the chessboard, and you can see that's an equal position so far. Now, Sánchez with bishop f6 defending the pawn. I thought the better place for the bishop might be the d6 square to defend the pawn. I get a check mark on that. Sánchez does play the bishop to f6, however, and now the knight comes to d2. A bit premature. You want to get that bishop out first and cover the c5 square. Your bishop can place himself there, but it also prevents any expansion from the queen's bishop's pawn. Instead, Bobby playing knight d2, and now g6, hitting the queen. a5 here is being called for by our fickle bot, coming up and then hitting the bishop. Makes perfect sense. Instead, queen is attacked by the g-man and retreats to the f3 square. Queen e7 from Sánchez, queen g3, now bishop h4, hitting the queen. Queen h2, and bishop back to f6. Knight f3, adding some more pressure to the e-man. Bishop e6, putting the question to our king's bishop. That question is answered in the normal way, bishop c2, and this bishop comes back to d7 to relocate on the long diagonal, no doubt. Bishop h6 hits that rook. King's rook to e8 is played. Now h4, bishop g7, interrogating our queen's bishop. Perhaps he should have tried this bishop g4 first and apply some pressure onto the knight. Instead, he went with bishop g7 and bishop g5, asking the queen if she wants to duke it out. f6 says obviously not, hits the bishop. Bishop comes back to its home square. Now bishop f8, speaking of returning to the home square, and the bot again calling for a5 and a4. h5 striking at the castle. g5 avoids opening lines to his king. Good advice by Sánchez. Queen g3, queen g7. Well, the point that the fickle bot is making here is this is slightly more active because it puts an attack on an undefended pawn. Instead, queen g7 and knight h2. Pawn h6 secures some things in place, but two pretty weak pawns on f6 and h6. And knight g4 gives both of them a menacing stare. Now queen f7 is played, queen f3, and really you can't take that anyway because it would result in a fork. Forkosaurus Rex. But with this queen in place, bishop b3 is a strong move, isn't it? Let's see what Sánchez plays. Bishop g7. And yeah, the better way to support these two weaklings is with the king and keep this bishop on an open diagonal. Keep the lines open for your long-range attackers. Keep them closed for your opponents. Instead, Sánchez with bishop g7. Now knight e3. And I would have really rather brought my bishop out of bed to that square, personally. The bot calling for pawn b3 with the idea of moving the bishop diagonally toward the queen side. Let's see what we get for this move. I get a check mark. So knight e3 was played here, and bishop e6, now knight f5. You know, it's interesting, on the previous move, the bot recommended b3. With this battery glaring in this direction, b3 now might be a good move. Let's see what it thinks of that. A star. And yeah, once again, we can bring our bishop on the short c1, a3 diagonal, meanwhile blunting the a2, g8 diagonal. b3 was definitely playable. I got a star for that. Knight to f5 was the move chosen from Bobby, and bishop back to f8. I feel like you can take this pawn, though, right? Isn't that why you moved there? Coming back to why I was really interested in b3 at that moment, and that gets a thumbs up. I think I'll develop my bishop and put the question to your knight and see if you want to squeeze your queen's pawns to the edge. He'd probably defend. Maybe the other rook might be better. Neither of them are liked by the bot. Anyway, he didn't take the pawn. Bishop f8. Now pawn b3 is played, and queen's rook to d8. Bishop e3 at last, and here rook d7. Gets a question mark. Get that knight off that square. Don't get your pawns doubled up and squished to the edge of the world. And obviously, from knight c8, you can relocate to the d6 square. Bobby not exploiting that, but gives him a second chance to play knight c8. For Bobby has played queen h3 here. An interesting move, curious move. I'm not real clear on why queen h3. It gets a big red X. I'm not even sure. Why would you move into a pin here, Bobby? I'm a little bit confused by this move. Any suggestions from the peanut gallery are certainly welcome as to the idea behind a queen h3 move here. I am unclear as to its purpose. But definitely saying, hey, you should have doubled up his pawns. And not giving him that second chance. But Sánchez not taking the second chance, not biting at that second bite to the apple. Instead, he plays king h7. He too gets the big red X. Bishop d1 here, again not taking. And finally, knight c8 is played. Bishop g4 now. Okay, so that was the idea, is he wanted to form this battery. So he put the queen in place, got out of the way of the bishop, and then, okay, it all comes to us now. As Hans Niemann would say, the chess has spoken for itself here. If you wonder why a move was made, perhaps just wait to see how the game plays out. You may get your answer. Knight d6, no surprise. We predicted this move quite some time ago, and knight retreats to g3. Now bishop takes the bishop, and queen takes the bishop. Queen e6 asks for a queen trade. So, yeah, the bot calling for rook e d8. Not only does this double the rooks on the open file, but it does create a square for the knight if you need to transfer one more time. Queen e6 was played, and that trade is made. A lot of rhyming there. No more rhyming. I mean it. Does anyone want a peanut? So sorry. King's rook to d1 here. Rook d8. Pawn a4. B takes a4. Rook takes a4. Knight b7 discovers a defense for the pawn. Rook d5, moving to a defended square. Rook c6, pawn c4. King g8, pawn c5. King f7, bot calling for rook c8. I thought rook b8 might work a little better. Open file, aiming at a target. I get a check mark. I mean, Bobby could just play b4 and solve that problem and get a star to boot. I mean, he might still move his knight out of the way, right? But you get it. Let's come back. King f7 was played. Now rook b4 attacks the undefended knight, and rook b8 defends. Rook d7 check. King e6. Rook h7. Rook b6, exploiting the pin. Pawn takes the rook. Do not take with the rook, by the way. On rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, pawn takes pawn, then knight d6. Let's go back. Instead, the best move is the one played by Fischer. Pawn takes the rook, bishop takes the rook, but now pawn takes the pawn, hitting that rook. And this pawn becomes a monster. On the precipice of promotion, black has to blockade with rook c8. Knight f5, and you can see he's only a square away from attacking that rook and covering the promotion square. It is covered by his bishop, I'm just saying. He played bishop f8 here, pawn g4, knight a5, pawn b4, and Sánchez bites at that, but gets the inaccuracy. He should have played his knight to b7. Although that's not going to be all that helpful, because that's going to be answered, at least in my mind, with rook h8. So you have to play king d7 to defend the rook. Then I can take the pawn anyway, because if you were to take my knight, probably better off taking this pawn, to be honest. But the point is, now black is dealing with two pass pawns against him. Yeah, you don't want to take this knight. If you take the knight, I'm taking, and this pass pawn comes to life. If you take this pawn, you're still fighting, I think. I'm going to take, you're going to take, but yeah, knight g8, and you have no way to defend this pawn, because that covers the defense square and attacks. And this is 3 squares away from promotion. Let's go back. In this game, he just went ahead and took the pawn right away. What about knight c6 hitting this pawn? I get a check mark for that. You'd still see rook h8, I gather. Yeah, thumbs up. All right, bishop takes the pawn was played. Oh, and the move that, oh my goodness, what a move. What a beautiful move. Bishop to d2. Please take my bishop. You see, the bishop cannot leave this diagonal because a hook checkmate is threatened. You see the hook there that the knight makes. Imagine a rook on e7, this rook, and you'll see the hook. That's covered, occupied, occupied, covered, and covered here. The knight covers there, and the rook will cover everything else from e7. The bishop is overworked. In other words, if you take my bishop, you are checkmated. It's easier to see there, right? Which means you have to give up the knight. This is a skewer. What a move. What a way to end this game. Black resigned because you have to give up the knight. Wow. And now you're playing a knight down, and that's an easy win. That was quite a move. That was so good, I suggest that we show it again in slow-mo replay. Bishop to D2. There you go, ladles and jelly spoons. Let's give you the numbers. Bobby Fischer scoring 94.8 accuracy. His single game rating 2,800. Talking about 16-year-old Bobby Fischer, ladles and jelly spoons. He completely outplayed Sánchez. Sánchez did play the opening well. Impeccable, really, was Black's opening. But with the well-fought middle game from Fischer, you see the result in this star move to end it.